Most men go to war to take lives. Desmond Doss went to save them. Imagine standing on the edge of a 400-foot cliff. Below you, a hellscape of jagged coral, rotting corpses, and the relentless scream of artillery. Above you, a plateau called Hacksaw Ridge, a place so deadly the United States Army sent thousands of men there to die, and most of them did. Now imagine you are standing in the middle of that meat grinder. You have no rifle, you have no pistol, you have no helmet, you have nothing but a small first aid kit and a promise you made to God. Your entire battalion has retreated. You are alone in the dark, with an entire Japanese division hunting you. Every time a grenade explodes, you don't run for cover. You run toward the scream. For 12 hours, while the rest of the world watched from the safety of the cliffs below, one man, a coward in the eyes of his peers, stayed behind. He didn't fire a single shot. But by dawn, he had dragged 75 bleeding, broken men to the edge of that cliff and lowered them to safety. This isn't a superhero movie. This isn't a myth. This is the story of the only conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor during World War II. This is the man who won a war without ever pulling a trigger. Desmond Doss wasn't born with a cross in one hand and a bandage in the other. He was a scrawny kid from Lynchburg, Virginia, growing up during the Great Depression. He was quiet, unassuming, and deeply religious. But his conviction didn't come from a Sunday school lesson. It came from blood. One day, young Desmond watched his father, a man struggling with the demons of the First World War and a heavy drinking habit, pull a gun during an argument with his uncle. Desmond saw the hollow look in his father's eyes. He saw the cold steel of the weapon. In that moment, something snapped inside him. He didn't just see a gun, he saw the end of humanity. He made a vow to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and more importantly, to himself. I will never touch a firearm, not for sport, not for defense, not for any reason. Then came December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. While other young men were rushing to enlist to kill the enemy, Desmond rushed to enlist to heal his countrymen. He wanted to be a medic. He wanted to serve. But the U.S. Army didn't have a category for non-violent soldier. They called him a conscientious objector. Desmond corrected them. He called himself a conscientious cooperator. He was willing to wear the uniform. He was willing to go into the fire. He just wouldn't carry the spark. When Desmond arrived at Fort Jackson, he wasn't met with respect. He was met with pure, unadulterated hatred. To the men of the 77th Infantry Division, a soldier without a rifle was a liability. He was a hole in the line. They saw his prayers as weakness and his refusal to train on the rifle range as an insult to their brotherhood. The harassment was relentless. His fellow soldiers threw boots at him while he prayed. They mocked his diet. They called him a holy roller. One night, a soldier leaned over his bunk and whispered, "Doss, when we get into combat, I'm gonna make sure you don't come back. I'll shoot you myself." Even the officers tried to break him. They attempted to discharge him under Section 8, mental instability. They claimed his religious beliefs were a form of insanity. They put him on trial. They tried to court-martial him for refusing a direct order to hold a rifle. Desmond stood his ground, a thin man against the weight of the entire military-industrial complex. He told them, "You can strip me of my rank, you can throw me in the brig, but you cannot force me to kill." Eventually, the army gave up. They let him keep his Bible and his bandages. They sent him to the Pacific, certain that the first time a Japanese soldier charged him with a bayonet, Desmond Doss would either pick up a gun or die. The transformation of Desmond Doss from the coward to the legend, began in the mud of Leyte in the Philippines. This was a war of rain, malaria, and invisible snipers. It was here that his fellow soldiers realized Doss wasn't afraid of death. He was just obsessed with life. While everyone else stayed in their foxholes during artillery barrages, Doss was out in the open. He didn't wait for the medic call to stop. He moved toward the sound of the explosion before the smoke had even cleared. On Leyte, he walked through a hail of fire to rescue 2 wounded men. He didn't have a gun to suppress the enemy, so he used his body as a shield. The men who had once mocked him began to watch him with a sense of awe. They realized that it takes a special kind of courage to walk into a gunfight without a gun. They started to realize that Doss was the bravest man among them. But Leyte was just a rehearsal. The real test was waiting in the north, a place the Japanese called the Gusu-ku and the Americans called Hacksaw Ridge. Okinawa, 1945. The final, bloodiest stand of the Japanese Empire. Hacksaw Ridge was a massive stone fortress. To reach it, the Americans had to climb a vertical cliff face using rope ladders. At the top was a flat, desolate plateau infested with thousands of Japanese soldiers hidden in a honeycomb of tunnels and caves. When the 77th Division reached the top, they walked into a trap. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. Machine gun fire cut the American line in half. Mortars turned the coral into shrapnel. The order was given: retreat. The Americans scrambled back to the edge and climbed down the ropes, leaving their dead and dying behind. They counted the survivors at the bottom. Desmond Doss was not among them. Up on the ridge, the Japanese moved out of their tunnels to finish off the survivors with bayonets. But in the smoke, a ghost was moving. Doss hadn't retreated. He couldn't. He saw his friends, the men who had kicked him, cursed him, and threatened to kill him, lying in the dirt, bleeding out. For the next 12 hours, Doss performed a miracle. He would crawl to a wounded man, patch him up, and then drag him through the mud to the edge of the 400-foot drop. He had no mechanical hoist. He had to tie a double bowline knot, a skill he learned as a kid in Virginia, and slowly lower each man down the cliff by hand. Each time he lowered a man, his hands bled from the rope. His lungs burned. The Japanese were so close, he could hear them talking. Every time he finished, he didn't head down himself. He looked up at the sky and prayed, "Please, Lord, help me get just one more." One more, and then another, and another. He did this 75 times. When he finally came down the rope, his clothes were soaked in the blood of 75 men. He was exhausted to the point of collapse. His battalion commander, the same man who had tried to court-martial him, looked at him and realized he was looking at the greatest soldier he had ever known. A few days later, the Americans prepared for the final assault on the ridge. But there was a problem. The men refused to go up. They said they wouldn't move unless Doss went with them. The battalion that had once tried to kick him out now refused to fight without his presence. They believed that as long as Doss was praying, they were invincible. It was the Sabbath, Doss's holy day. But he looked at the men and knew they needed him. He spent the morning reading his Bible, and then he led them back into the meat grinder. In that final battle, Doss's luck finally ran out. A Japanese grenade landed in his foxhole. Instead of kicking it toward his friends, he put his boot on it. The blast shattered his leg and riddled his body with shrapnel. As they were carrying him away on a stretcher, Doss saw another wounded man. He rolled off the stretcher and told the medics to take the other guy first. While he waited for them to come back, a sniper's bullet shattered his arm. He didn't scream. He didn't call for help. He took a broken piece of a rifle stock, the only time he ever touched a weapon, and used it as a splint for his arm. He crawled 300 yards to safety, alone. When the war ended, Desmond Doss was a broken man physically, but a giant spiritually. In October 1945, President Harry Truman stood on the lawn of the White House. He held a blue ribbon with a gold star. He looked at the quiet, humble man from Virginia and said, "I consider this a greater honor than being president." Desmond Doss didn't spend the rest of his life bragging. He didn't sell his story to Hollywood for decades. He lived a quiet life, serving his church and his community. He never hated the men who bullied him. He never hated the enemy who shot him. He stayed true to his vow until the day he died in 2006. Desmond Doss proved that you don't need a weapon to be a warrior. You don't need to hate to win. In a world consumed by the darkness of war, he was a light that refused to go out. He was the man who stayed, the man who prayed, the man who saved. History remembers the generals. It remembers the conquerors. But it will never forget the skinny kid from Virginia who went to the most violent place on earth and didn't take a single life. What is your Hacksaw Ridge? What is the conviction you refuse to break, even when the world is screaming at you to give in? Desmond Doss showed us that one man, armed with nothing but faith and a bandage, can change the world. If this story moved you, hit the like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into the lives of history's greatest unsung heroes. And tell us in the comments, could you have stayed on that ridge? Until next time, stay brave.